Are Latinos white? Hey guys, welcome back to Tiny Theories. Today's video is going to be a little different. So I recently came across a video here on YouTube where a bunch of Latinos from different parts of Latin America, like Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic and more, took DNA tests, and they were shocked to find out just how much European ancestry they had. And honestly, I was surprised that they were surprised. So I started digging into it, and what I found was super interesting. Growing up, I always saw celebrities like Jennifer Lopez, Ricky Martin, Cameron Diaz, Kaka, and even Lionel Messi as white. Why? Because every time I traveled to Europe, people there looked exactly like them. Like, picture this. You're walking through a street in Italy and you see Lionel Messi. Let's just say he's not famous, just some random guy. He turns to you and says, "Hey, I'm Italian." Would you be shocked? Would you think he's lying? Probably not, because he looks like he belongs there. But here's something that always confused me growing up. I'd hear people say things like blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and I'd stop and think, wait a minute, what exactly are Hispanics? What are Latinos? And why are they talked about like they're a race? Let's break this down. Let me paint a picture for you. Think about two football players from the Brazilian national team. On one side, you've got Vinicius Jr. On the other side, you've got Alisson Becker. They're both Brazilian. They're both Latino. But do they look anything alike? Do you think they come from the same racial background? Are they genetically the same? Of course not. And that's the point. Latino or Hispanic isn't a race. It's a culture. It's a shared language, history, and sometimes geography. But it's not a biological identity. And treating it like one oversimplifies the rich and diverse backgrounds of millions of people. So, are Latinos white? Maybe. Why maybe? Because Latinos are incredibly diverse. But here's what I keep hearing all the time. They're Hispanic, not white. Like those two things are completely separate. But let's think about this for a second. Do you know why most of Latin America speaks Spanish? Okay, this might sound crazy or even controversial to some people nowadays, borderline extreme. But Latin America speaks Spanish because of a small country in Europe called Spain. Yep, Spain, an actual European country with an actual European language called Spanish. Mind blown. And here's the part that really seems to shock people. Spanish people are white. Yes, native Spaniards are white Europeans, and to everyone out there who's shocked by this, let me say it loud and clear. White people aren't just British and German. Wow, shocking, right? Europe is a whole continent, not just the UK and Germany. Ever heard of Italians, Greeks, Slovakians, Polish, Lithuanians, Albanians, Portuguese, Dutch, Norwegians? Yes, they're all white too. But I know someone's going to say, but Tiny Theories, a Spanish person doesn't look like a Norwegian. And you're right, they don't look exactly the same. But guess what? They still fall under the same racial category, white. That's like saying a Senegalese man and an Ethiopian woman don't look the same, so they're not both black. Come on, of course they are. There's variation within every racial group, but that doesn't mean they stop being part of that group. Same thing applies to Europeans. Not all white people are blonde-haired and blue-eyed Vikings. Some are tan-skinned Mediterraneans with dark hair, and they're still white. To really understand all of this, we need to look at how Latin American countries were actually created. Before European colonizers arrived, Latin America wasn't one big cultural block. It was home to indigenous civilizations, like the Aztecs in what's now Mexico, the Maya in parts of Central America, the Inca Empire in the Andes, covering modern-day Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador and parts of Chile, and hundreds of smaller tribes and kingdoms spread all across the continent. Each of these groups had their own languages, their own religions, completely separate from each other. So no, Latin America wasn't some united region back then. It was a patchwork of very different indigenous cultures. Then, between the 1500s and 1700s, everything changed. That's when European colonization began. So between the 1500s and 1700s, European powers, mainly Spain and Portugal, began colonizing huge parts of the Americas. Spain took over most of what we now call Latin America, while Portugal grabbed what is now Brazil. What followed was a complete transformation of the region. Indigenous people were conquered, their empires destroyed. Many were killed by violence or diseases brought by Europeans. Catholicism was introduced. New languages like Spanish and Portuguese replaced native ones. But here's where it gets deeper. The colonizers didn't come alone. Over time, they brought millions of enslaved Africans to the Americas, especially to places like Brazil, the Caribbean, and coastal regions of Central and South America. So now you had three major groups living and mixing in Latin America. Europeans, mostly Spanish and Portuguese, indigenous peoples, the original inhabitants, Africans brought through the transatlantic slave trade, and over centuries, these groups intermixed, creating new identities like mestizo, mixed European and indigenous, mulatto, mixed European and African, Zambo, mixed indigenous and African, and many more unique cultural blends. That's why when people say Latinos all look the same or treat Latino as a race, it makes no sense. Latin America is the result of massive cultural and racial mixing. There are white Latinos, black Latinos, indigenous Latinos, Asian Latinos, and every combination you can imagine. Now let's fast forward to today, and let's talk about how this complex history affects how Latinos are seen in the modern world, especially in places like the United States. Because here's the thing, when people hear the word Latino or Hispanic, a very specific image comes to mind. Usually someone with tan skin, maybe brown eyes, dark hair, speaks Spanish with an accent, probably Catholic, probably from Mexico or somewhere nearby. But that image, it leaves out millions of people. Like, what about the Afro-Latinos from Colombia or the Dominican Republic who get mistaken for African Americans? Or the white Latinos from Argentina, Uruguay or Chile who people assume are just regular white Americans until they speak Spanish? Or Asian Latinos in places like Peru and Brazil, or indigenous communities in Mexico or Guatemala who speak ancient native languages, not even Spanish. This is why race and identity get so confusing. In the US, people try to fit Latinos into one racial box, when in reality, Latinos come in all shades, all backgrounds, all histories. And when people say things like, they're not white, they're Hispanic, it shows how much we misunderstand what Hispanic Latino even means. Like we said earlier, it's not a race, it's a cultural and linguistic identity that exists on top of whatever race you are. So yes, you can be Latino and white, you can be Latino and black, you can be Latino and indigenous, you can even be Latino and Asian. The Latino identity is a mix, a beautiful, complicated, sometimes messy mix that reflects centuries of migration, colonization, and cultural blending. So let's go back to the original question we started with. Are Latinos white people? Well, a lot of them, yes. Let's look at the actual numbers, because facts don't lie. These are some estimates of the white identifying population in Latin American countries as of 2025. Argentina, 97% of the population identifies as white. Have you seen their president? Come on, the guy looks like he could be running for office in Spain or Italy. Chile, around 89% white. Uruguay, 88% white. Costa Rica, 83.6% white. Cuba, 64% white. And yes, Cuba is racially mixed, but that's still a majority. Brazil, 43.5% white. And let's not forget, Brazil is massive and incredibly diverse. But of course, not all Latin American countries have a large white population. There are also places where the white population is much smaller, like Guatemala, only about 6.7% white, the majority are indigenous or mestizo. Bolivia and Peru also have high indigenous populations and relatively small white minorities. But now you might be wondering, if so many Latinos are genetically white, why don't they identify as white? Or why are some people so proud of their indigenous roots, even if genetically they might have very little indigenous ancestry? Well, there isn't one single answer. There are a few different reasons, and each one says a lot about how people think about race and identity today. 1. Some people just don't know. They were told, "You're Latino," and they're like, "Yeah, cool, I'm Latino." No research, no DNA tests, no curiosity, just vibes. And honestly, that's fine. Not everyone cares about digging into their ancestry. 2. Some people care more about culture than DNA. Even if their bloodline is 90% European, they grew up with Spanish music, telenovelas, Catholic grandmas, Latin food, family barbecues, so they feel Latino. And in their minds, that's not the same as being white in the American or European sense. They identify with the culture they were raised in, not necessarily their genetics. 3. And then there's what I call culture pornography. Yeah, I said it. Some people just love romanticizing their identity. They want to feel special, unique, mystical. So instead of saying, "I'm white" or "I'm black," they say, "I'm part Indigenous, part Sephardic Jewish, part Arab Andalusian, a little Roman, a touch of Babylonian, and I think I might have Viking blood from my great-great-great-great-grandfather's neighbor's dog." Bro, just say you're white. It's like someone saying, "Hey guys, I'm Polish, Slavic, Central European." Okay bro, you're white. But again, that's human nature. People want to feel special, like their story is more interesting than a label. And to be fair, culture and identity are personal. But sometimes we confuse culture with race, and it leads to all kinds of contradictions. There's another reason why some Latinos, even white-presenting ones, don't identify as white. It has to do with recent history and the lasting shadow of colonialism. For a lot of people, especially in Latin America, the word white is strongly tied to the idea of the colonizer, the outsider who came, conquered, enslaved, destroyed indigenous cultures, and imposed a new order. So some people don't want to identify as white because in their mind, that's identifying with the oppressor. They see whiteness as something bad, evil, guilty. But here's the thing nobody wants to say. Yes, European colonizers did horrible things, but they weren't the only ones. Have you ever heard what the Aztecs used to do to their enemies? You think European warfare was brutal? The Aztecs literally ripped people's hearts out while they were still alive. Know what the Mongols did? Genghis Khan wiped out entire cities, piled heads like trophies, and changed the gene pool of entire continents. What about the Japanese Empire in World War II, or the Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia? Or what certain Chinese dynasties did to rebels and outsiders? Humans across every race and religion have done atrocious things throughout history. Conquest, slavery, genocide, exploitation. It's not a European thing, it's a human thing. But for some reason, only what the European empires did is constantly remembered, taught and judged in modern society. And in today's world, where victimhood is often seen as a kind of moral currency, people would rather identify with the colonized than the colonizer. It's easier to say, "I come from the oppressed," than "my ancestors might have been the oppressors." Because in that version, you're the good guy. You're the one who suffered, not the one who inflicted suffering. But history is history. You don't get to change your ancestry because it makes you uncomfortable. You don't have to be proud of everything your ancestors did, but you should be honest about where you come from. Facing the truth, even when it's messy, even when it's complicated, is how we grow.